So I've been in a bit of a true crime mood lately. I've been looking into the case of Damienechols and the West Memphis Three, the tragic true story that Eddie Munson and his storyline was based off of. The three were convicted on evidence that was shaky at best, but circumstances surrounding the case that I won't go into here lead people to debate to this very day whether or not they actually did it. But this got me thinking. Suppose Eddie was caught, arrested for Chrissy's murder, and his case went to trial. Would they really have enough evidence to convict him? I would say no. And I know that sounds crazy, but let me explain. Keep in mind, I am not a law expert, nor do I profess to be one. This is just a fun little mental exercise I did with a handful of research I was able to dig up. I'm also probably on a list somewhere for Googling all this shit, so with that in mind, let's begin. Anyone who has even a cursory familiarity with case law knows that a hypothetical defense team wouldn't have to prove that Eddie didn't kill Chrissy. They would just need to assert that the prosecution cannot state, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he did. Of course, Chrissy Cunningham's body was found in his trailer, and witness testimony would place him at the scene of the crime, which would seem like pretty damning evidence. But let's back up a bit. Max would be our only witness here. She'd be integral in this case as she saw both Eddie and Chrissy enter the trailer, and then later, Eddie fleeing from the trailer looking scared. Though it's a bit difficult to pin down an exact time frame as the events of the night are split across the first 2 episodes of season 4, we know that the two of them couldn't have been in there long. Eddie goes into his bedroom to retrieve the ketamine Chrissy requested, and when he returns, she is already in the process of being taken by Vecna. Between the two entering and Eddie fleeing, it's reasonable to assume that, within universe, no more than 10 or 15 minutes could have passed. Not a lot of time to commit such a grisly murder in. Keep this time factor in mind because I'm going to come back to it later. We're going to have to sidetrack for a moment and take a look at Chrissy's injuries. It may seem like a long tangent, but it's integral to the point I intend to make, so bear with me. Chrissy's injuries are extensive to say the least. Both arms and legs broken, her jaw broken, and her eyes removed. I've looked over both her death scene and set photos, and it looks like her arms snap just above the elbow and at the wrist, and her legs break in several places, all below the calf. Now, it's tough to say exactly how much force is required to break a bone because, of course, no two skeletons are alike. Factors such as bone strength, how the break was made, and from what angle all come into consideration. Remember, we aren't talking about superficial damage here. These are compound fractures, meaning the bone is snapped in half. With that in mind, here's what I've gathered. According to this article from Ghana Medical Journal, which I will link below, it is estimated that it takes about 44.6 to 74.4 kilograms per square meter to break a human jawbone. In other words, between 9 and 15 pounds of pressure exerted directly on the bone to fracture it. On the low end, that would be the equivalent of dropping a classic record player on someone's head. On the higher end, it would be like smashing a bowling ball into some poor soul's face. The bones in the arms are more tricky. I couldn't find a straight answer when it came to them. Some estimated about 100 pounds psi, others said only 20 to 30 pounds psi. Regardless, while we cannot be sure about the arms, breaking a wrist is not exactly a hard feat. Wrist injuries are very common because the bones there are very small. With enough strength and good enough leverage, one good twist is all it would take. When it comes to the legs, the force required to break a human tibia can fall between 200 pounds and 5 times the weight of its owner. We're unsure exactly what Chrissy weighs, so we'll just go off of reports of the weight of her actress, Gracie Van Dien, and say that our unfortunate cheerleader clocks in at about 106 pounds. Sidebar: 106? Damn, what the hell was Chrissy's mom complaining about? Girl is skinny. Knowing this, we can determine that it would take between 200 to 530 pounds psi to cause that kind of damage. Applying the same logic we did to Chrissy, we can look to Joseph Quinn to determine that Eddie weighs about 154 pounds. Quite a bit more than Chrissy, yes, but nowhere near a bodybuilder. Are you ready for the point? Because here it comes. Max Mayfield witnesses Eddie Munson and Chrissy Cunningham entering his trailer. Approximately 15 minutes elapse, and then Eddie comes running out, enters his car, and drives off. Is it at all plausible that in that amount of time, Eddie could have caused those injuries to Chrissy without the use of tools. See, bones can be broken with one's bare hands, but that requires three things: leverage, strength, and time. None of which you have in a 15-minute window with a presumably struggling girl you're trying to hold under you with your 48 pounds weight advantage. The fact is, bone breaks more easily when you're using some sort of blunt instrument. A hammer, a bat, something you can swing real hard into someone and cause a lot of damage. I have no doubt the cops would be sniffing around Eddie's trailer and the surrounding area for anything they could claim as the murder weapon. The problem with that is if a tool was used to break Chrissy's limbs, that tool would have left some kind of mark on her skin. More significant bruising or cuts. A hit from a fist doesn't leave the same marks as a hit with a hammer. The only marks on Chrissy's body were the bruising around her fractures, which is inconsistent with the kind of wounds you would find on a person who was attacked with a weapon. Then, there's the matter of the eyes. Being one of the most vulnerable spots on our body, it's not as if it would have been impossible for Eddie to remove them. However, it would be significantly more difficult to do so without some kind of tool. Not impossible, as stated before. Hypothetically, Eddie could have just clawed them out in some kind of rage. But if that were the case, one would expect more damage to the soft tissue of her surrounding sockets. Instead, the removal looks clean, almost surgical. It's also worth noting that anyone sustaining these injuries under normal circumstances would be in a lot of pain. Yet strangely, the only screams Max hears are Eddie's. There's also the matter of the lack of any defensive wounds on Chrissy's body, no blood or skin under her fingernails. If she supposedly fought for her life against a brutal attack from Eddie, there would be evidence of it on her corpse. Now, is it possible that Eddie pinned Chrissy down, prevented her from screaming for help, broke all of her limbs with his bare hands, and removed her eyes all within 15 minutes? Maybe. Is it probable? Absolutely not. In my opinion, if this case were ever to go before a court, there's far too much reasonable doubt involved for a jury to confidently and justly declare Eddie guilty. Unfortunately, in a case like this, where tension is running high and the public is screaming for justice, all of this still might not be enough to save Eddie. In the case of the West Memphis Three, though those men had their own histories of shady activities, no physical evidence or motive ever tied them to the crime they were accused of. But a coerced confession and the ongoing satanic panic assured a conviction. Sadly, I think if Eddie's case had ever gone before a court, it wouldn't have turned out much differently. Thankfully, the real-life story of the West Memphis Three doesn't end quite as tragically as Eddie's. In 2011, the three took an Alford plea and were released after 18 years in prison. To this day, they still maintain their innocence. If you would like to hear more about their story, I again ask you to check out this video by Matt Orchard. It presents the case in an unbiased, even-handed way that not many other resources on this case do. It is genuinely excellent and well worth a watch. Thanks for listening to me ramble. If you guys like this video and want to hear my random opinions on more stuff, like the video and leave a comment down below. See ya!